sitting here in little Sweden, in the middle of somewhere. And everyone seems these days, mid-October 2022, to look that way over there. It's all about Putin, Putin, Putin. But I think I learned somewhere that if they tell you to all look one direction, it may be good to look the opposite direction too, the one they don't want you to look into. So that's what I'm doing. Over there, to the west, that country that has officially declared itself the leader of the world.
And the United States and our allies and partners are moving as fast as possible to continue to provide Ukraine the forces that they need, the weapons they need, the equipment they need, their forces need to defend their nation.
I don't know if this guy is even aware of that he's the leader of the world, nor if that's the one the rest of us would want as the leader of the world. But of course, if we look a little deeper into the inner workings of that grand nation over there, a different picture emerges, such as is often the case. Well, you might know this lady, Tulsi Gabbard. She was one of the Democratic president candidates for the 2020 election. Hawaii congresswoman and soldier in the U.S. Army, a smart lady who seems to have a good heart and integrity. Now, just some days ago, she announced that she's leaving the Democratic Party because, as she said, it's not what it used to be. Maybe even the opposite, but that's another story. She and others I heard talking over there in the West gives a bit of a different view on what's going on in the world today, especially when it comes to what you otherwise never really hear about in the media these days, the U.S. involvement in this whole mess.
Well, first I'll say President Biden has been enacting policies and actions that have further escalated this war, rather than exercising the opportunity and responsibility that he has as the President of the United States to work to bring these parties together, de-escalate, and come to a negotiated, peaceful solution.
Well, of course, it's clear to see. We got those guys over there in Russia being bad. Of course, when you hear them speak, and that's how it sounded for the past few years when I heard them, they say things like this. As the Russian UN representative recently said,
everything that is happening now did not start at the end of February, and not even 8 years ago. It started much earlier, with the encouragement and support of the United States and its Western satellites. You assured yourself of the purely defensive nature of NATO. At the same time, you have moved the borders of NATO to our borders. And today you are already talking about the global role of the alliance, including in Asia.
That they are responding to an aggressive, threatening presence of NATO and U.S. military bases just next to their borders. Which I can relate to because it is rather true, isn't it? But no one seems to care about that for some reason, or very few. But again, I found Tulsi Gabbard there a couple of days ago talking to Joe Rogan. Well, as a military woman, informing us a bit of how it works over there.
Let's start with the military-industrial complex. Okay. What is it? Who is it? It is these massive defense corporations who make all these different weapon systems, from the smallest to the most powerful nuclear weapons and missiles. When we are at war, they make a lot of money. When politicians, even if we're not at war but are threatening that we may go to war, they make a lot of money. And these decisions are not made within the context of, hey, what does our military actually need? What do we need to ensure that our military is ready to defend our country and our national security interests? It is very often what members of Congress are advocating for, even more than the military is asking for sometimes, because of those cozy relationships with the military-industrial complex, with these massive defense contractors and their lobbyists. So there's a direct there's a direct correlation as the money is changing hands there. This issue of putting our country in a continual state of war is supported by leaders in both parties and the majority of people in both parties. And it's directly tied to the military-industrial complex's influence.
Yeah, apparently, even obviously, war is very good business for some. And maybe you notice she says here that this ongoing war situation that the US seems to prefer to be in, mostly not directly but by proxy, is not really chosen by, if I understood it right, agencies of national defense, but by the Congress, where a significant amount of members seem to be very good buddies with the guys doing lobbying for said military-industrial complex. Well, justified or not, good business it seems to be, whoever pays for it in the end. According to CBS, the US has approved more than $55 billion in economic and military aid to Ukraine, and the UK nearly $3 billion in military aid alone, and the EU another $2.5 billion in arms for Ukraine. And even my little country here, Sweden, that used to pride itself for being neutral, is sending now weapons to Ukraine to be used for killing Russians. I don't know about you, but I get a bad taste in my mouth from all this. Now, these are apparently the nations on the planet right now that are sending weapons to Ukraine for being used in war against Russia. Now, frankly speaking, to me, this looks like a world war. Because if you're providing soldiers with weapons to fight another country, doesn't that mean you're participating in that war? Well, I checked that out a little bit, and it used to be like that until 1928. Before that, in the so-called Old World Order, even economic sanctions against one side in a war or supplying arms to one side used to be considered a breakage of neutrality. But then something called the Kellogg-Briand Pact came, which after that permits states to supply weapons and other support to, for instance, Ukraine. Still, I am sitting here thinking, two guys are fighting, and if I'm giving one of them a gun to help him fight, and then he uses that to shoot the other guy, am I not taking part in that fight? Anyway, weapons are being shipped there, I guess for good and honorable intentions by all those countries who think that if we all get together now, we help out to enforce international law, which forbids rogue nations like Russia to invade their neighbor countries, then we can stop them by this massive pressure of the global community. Well, one thing is that it seems that only about 30% of the weapons coming into Ukraine ever reach the front line. The rest of it is mysteriously gone. Some have even raised concerns about weapons falling into the black market in Ukraine, which has thrived of corruption since the fall of the Soviet Union. And of course, we also know that some of the Ukrainian troops, a significant amount of them actually, belong to the extremist, rightist, Nazi types that are known to exist over there. Well, anyway, back to Tulsi Gabbard. She brings up some important points in all this.
Go on down the line and we end up with this potential nuclear outcome. And so, our leaders are saying, well, hey, we can't do anything. This is all in Putin's hands. Well, guess what? The United States, our leaders and European leaders are the ones fueling and funding this war. So they have a heck of a lot of leverage to be able to push for a ceasefire, negotiated outcome, and an end to this war, and to actually fight for peace and prosperity. And we need to know that if they're not doing that, and they aren't right now, then what they are doing is pushing for more destruction, more war, and therefore a lack of peace and prosperity and more suffering for us and people around the world.
Could it be so that, even driven by the military-industrial complex somewhere, the West is unnecessarily fueling this war rather than trying to assist in negotiations to create peace? That the whole world, or the Western world at least, so quickly and wholeheartedly and uncompromisingly, even peaceful, neutral Sweden, line up and actively support the use of deadly violence that undoubtedly brings the world dangerously close to nuclear war. I really wonder, is this necessary and called for? Did anyone even say, hey, let's hold it for a while, let's lay down the weapons for a while, and then the world leaders bring the two parts together at a table and try to work something out? Even here in Sweden, which is usually known for its diplomatic role, I have never even heard that being mentioned as an option. I don't know, maybe it's just me. But it makes me confused, and it makes me wonder, is there someone over there in the West who really, really wants that war to go on?